Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not a professional speaker, but I'm kind of passionate about what I'm talking about. You know, my dad, what it meant to my dad, and he understood what it meant to you guys. And one thing just came to me right now when Don was talking about that they christened number 4 engine, kind of jumping into the middle of the speech just because, you know, he said that. One of the missions, Dad had almost all the fuel cells in the plane shot out. They were trying to get back to England, and they had one engine running. They ran at full throttle, full manifold pressure, and when they got close to the English Canal, my dad told everybody to get their parachutes on and bail out. They weren't sure they were going to be able to get across the English Canal. February, the canal was 21 degrees. Your life expectancy is 3 to 5 minutes at best. Everybody gets their parachutes on. They walk up, they hand the parachute to my dad. My dad said, "I'm taking it across." He didn't want their plane to go in the drink. He was willing to basically die, try to make sure that plane got home, because he appreciated how much people paid for that plane. Not the government bought that plane, the workers at Hanford Energy Group. So the navigator looks at him and says, "You're going across, we're all going across." And they made it. They landed with 25 gallons of fuel left, and I never knew that it was the number 4 engine that she had christened. The only engine they had running when they got home was number 4 engine. That just came to light when he was talking about her christening the number 4 engine. You know, because Dad said it was so hard to fly. If it had been one of the inboard engines, it would have been a whole lot easier, but it was an outboard engine, and he had to run it full. And I can't imagine, I'm not a pilot, but I can't imagine what it'd be like to have one engine out here trying to pull everything to try to, you know, keep the rudders and keep it straight. Those planes were burning 413 gallons an hour, and they landed with 25 gallons left. Anyway, my dad was actually, when he got out of high school, he went to Wichita, Kansas, went to work at Boeing. You know, and it's kind of fitting to be, you know, wound up being in a Boeing plane later, but he worked at Boeing for 3 years and then was drafted into the Army. And he gets into the Army and they hand him a 1903 Springfield. And real quick, my dad realized that this just wasn't what he really wanted to do. And they were losing so many pilots and gunners and everybody to the war effort in the planes that they started opening up to anybody that could pass an aptitude test could switch over to the Army Air Corps. Because before, to get to be a pilot or a co-pilot, you had to have a college degree. And then they kind of reduced that down to where you had to have some college education. And they said, if you can pass an aptitude test, you can be a pilot. You know, so my dad still had to keep doing his infantry training the whole time. He had the right angle flashlights they had in World War II. He was burning up a set of batteries every week, studying all night. He'd pull his army blanket over and he would study for this aptitude test. And when he took the test, there was 800 and some people, and I don't know the exact numbers, but 800 and some people took that test, and he finished number 3. Put him in the category to be a pilot, and that's when he started going through pilot school. Got out of the infantry and got into pilot school. His first plane he drew over there was a B-24 Liberator with the nose paint of Shoo Shoo Baby. He flew that 12 full missions. A 13th mission, they took off. They just got over the English Canal and the generator quit. They couldn't make the generator run. So they didn't have the heated muffs. They didn't have anything for the gun sights. Wouldn't have power for the radio. So they had to turn around and go back. They got penalized. That mission didn't count. And so the next 13th mission he drew Hanford's plane, day's pay. And of course, you know, everybody, 13th mission the first time came off not so good. What's the second 13th mission going to be like? And they flew that day, and I virtually no flak, no fighters, very easy mission. By the second mission, Dad had said that plane could almost fly itself. He said it was so easy to fly. The B-24 Liberator, he said, was a cumbersome plane, didn't fly as good. He said the B-17G flew almost like the Spearman he was trained in as a single engine plane. And so he was just overwhelmed with how good the plane did. One of the things is the German fighters would never attack them from the sides. They would attack the 24s from the side because they had so much more firepower. You know, if you came at the side of a B-17G, you could have the top turret with 250s, the bottom turret, waist gunner, you could have 4 or 5 50 calibers aiming at you at any one time. And so they would not come at them from the side. They come at them below and from above. Sometimes they got fighter escorts, sometimes they didn't. The P-51 Mustangs, they really liked it when they got them for a fighter escort, because if the Germans seen that they had 51s with them, they wouldn't come up after them. The bad side is the P-51 pilots realized this, so when they got close to the bomb site, they would hang high and right, way behind the bomb group, and wait for them to send the Messerschmitts up after them, and then the 51s would go after the Messerschmitts. You know, Dad says occasionally you kind of felt like it's a piece of steak, you know, put out there for some bait, you know. But you know, it's just one of the notes on there is the ball turret on the bottom could be you could climb into it and out of it from the plane, but if it got damaged and you couldn't roll the ball over to get your door up to go into the plane, if it became damaged and they were going to land, especially if no running gears or anything, they would turn all the bolts. They could actually unbolt that ball turret and drop it off. And then the ball turret gunner is on his own to get out of it and get his parachute deployed. Dad's ball turret gunner went out there one night with a hammer and ball peened all of his bolts where they weren't going to be able to drop him off. You know, I think that's all well and fine, but you know, if you think about doing a belly landing and you're in the ball turret on the bottom, you aren't going to live. You know, but he wasn't going to be dropped out. But talking about, you know, that mission with the on that 4th engine is so astonishing because of the pride Dad had in that plane and understanding that hardworking people paid for that. You know, he talked about that more than just a little bit, you know, the appreciation he had for that. You know, and just amazing. The flak at times, and of course you're probably all familiar with the flak, what it is. Might not, some of the younger people might not be. It's an altitude bomb. The Germans could dial in what altitude they wanted to go off at, and that shell would go up to that altitude and explode. And it was designed in such a fashion that virtually all the shrapnel blew out. Hardly any went up and hardly any went down. It all went out. One mission, his bombardier got up off his chair, walked up to my dad to borrow a Lucky Strike cigarette from him. If you can imagine this, they're flying, they're on oxygen, and he wanted to smoke. Goes up to get his Lucky Strike cigarette, lights it up, goes back to sit down, and there was a hole blowed through his bombardier's chair from a piece of shrapnel. And that pretty much just about had to be the very nose of that shell, because virtually none of that shrapnel went up and down. Almost all of it went out. And so that was kind of amazing. You know, just to think about that. The waist gunners at times would talk about on a real rough mission, the shrapnel was so thick, and every time one of those shells explode, they'd have a great big black cloud. And one of the waist gunners said at one time, he swore he could have jumped out of the plane and walked across the smoke because it was so heavy. You know, and that's just hard to imagine. One mission, Dad was talking about flying along, and the plane was actually pulsating as the shrapnel bombs was going off. And they fly in 3 levels, 4 planes in each group. And Dad, you didn't choose where you flew, they give you your assignment. And Dad's assignment that day was the bottom level. And he's flying along, and his plane is pulsating every time a shrapnel bomb would go off below him. And so he motions to the other planes that he could see to go up 10 feet. They raised 10 feet in elevation, and the plane quit pulsating. You know, how close was the bombs? Yeah. You know, that's just unbelievable. Some of the funny things about it, you know, they're going out there and on radio silence. They're not supposed to speak a word because the Germans would pick them up and know they were coming. And they were getting close to the bomb site. About this time, Dad come across the radio, "Who dat?" And it was silence for about 10 or 15 seconds, and then somebody else came on there and said, "Who say, who dat?" And then about 10 or 15 seconds later, and somebody else will say, who say that? Who say? And Dad said that kept carrying on until it was about 10 words long, and all of a sudden the colonel gets on there and snarled, "Damn it, I said radio silence." And it just quiet. They normally started communicating back and forth when they were going back to the base to see who lost, what men were lost, what planes were lost, because they were a tight-knit group. Actually, just the crew was so tight that my dad stayed in communication with him till he died. And after he died, they even paid for my mom a plane ticket to fly back there for another one of the reunions. They were real tight. But the other crew members, the other crews that they were buddied with, they were also tight. And they always radio back and forth communicating. And that day with radio silence, they landed without saying a word. The radio would say, "You're clear to land, you're clear to land." They would land, nobody said a word. The one thing that was kind of a funny note is when Dad was in pilot's training, he was down in Tampa, Florida, and at that time he was flying a B-24 Liberators. And he gets, the base general walks up to him and said, "Lieutenant Weininger, find you a co-pilot. We're flying to Omaha, Nebraska tonight." My dad looked at him and said, "Yes, sir." And he didn't ask what for. He said, "Yep, I'm going to go up and have supper with my wife." So his best buddy, who was a pilot also, was Bobby Willis from Watson, Arkansas. And so my dad goes to Bobby Willis and says, "Bob, how would you like to fly to Omaha, Nebraska tonight? Be my co-pilot." And it was kind of a degrading to ask a pilot to be a co-pilot. But Bobby thought, "Heck yeah, I get to fly to Omaha, Nebraska tonight. Let's do it." They get in the plane, they fly out. They fly to Omaha, Nebraska. The general has supper with his wife. They wait at the plane. He comes back out. They get in, fire up, take off. And as they're coming into the Tampa base, they're coming in for the approach, and they look up there and there's about 20 or 30 MP Jeeps. They land, and all these Jeeps are following them in. And the first thing they do is they march into the plane, and they grab my dad, and they marched him off in one Jeep and off one direction, and grabbed Bobby Willis and took him off in another direction, and took the general off in a third direction. And they get Dad in the room in there, and they said, "What were you doing?" He says, "Flying the general to Omaha, Nebraska." "Why?" My dad looked at him and says, "He's the CO. I did what he told me." I do what I'm told. Bobby Willis is in the other interrogation room, and he tells him the exact same thing. Nothing happened to Dad or Bobby. The base general was never seen from again. I don't know. I'm sure they didn't court-martial him, because you wouldn't do that in wartime, but I would imagine he got moved to a different base, and he may not have had all these stars when he was said and done. But it's kind of comical stuff like that. And but he always talked about how much better of a plane that 17 was than the 24. He said the firepower that the B-17G carried, the machine guns it had, everything was just so much more impressive on that plane than the 24. Wasn't me, didn't do it. But he was so appreciative to get that plane, and I wished my dad would be alive to come out and thank the Hanford people for this, because he's talked about that a lot, that it was just so fantastic to be able to fly a piece of machinery that would almost fly itself. One of the missions, one of the other planes in their group was shot up so bad it had nothing left in the midsection. The navigator was dead, the radio operator was dead, both waist gunners, the bombardier. The only people living was the pilot and the front gunner and the tail gunner. And they're coming back in to England, and of course they let everybody else land, because they say this plane can't stay together, because all that was holding it was just the metal framework from the back to the front, and they landed and it did not come apart. So that was one tough plane. It was just extremely tough. You'd hate to be in that position. Some of the things that my dad got out of this deal was he learned he was not a great student in high school. And by his own testimony, he said I was probably kind of a slacker, didn't put forth the total effort and everything. I was just talking to the college up here, and I was telling them this story about Dad's, how he enjoyed education and he learned to get smarter, how he studied to be a pilot. He never quit trying to teach himself something. He learned how to do wiring. He learned how to do plumbing. He could do anything. Overhaul trucks, cars, he could do it all. And I was telling that to the students up there a while ago, and that's why I'm a little bit late here. One of the students came up afterwards, and of course I harped on him pretty hard about stay in school. Get a good education. You cannot substitute a good education. One of those students came up to me after the deal up there and shook my hand. He was going to drop out. And he said, because of hearing the story about what our soldiers went through in World War II, and me harping him on a good education, he's going to stay in school. So that made me feel pretty darn good. But he was, one of the things he always talked about was, his exact quote is, "It's a top flying plane and it's surely paid for itself." And he was talking about Hanford's employees paying for that, because he had so much appreciation knowing that this wasn't just the government grabbing tax money. They said, these people volunteered to pay for this plane. At Christmas time, they would send over your care packages from your family. My dad got care packages from everybody at Hanford, him and his group. And they got a pallet load of stuff. One of the things I brought out that we did not find until my mom is in the rest home with dementia, very strong. And so we finally had to sell the homestead for money to keep her in the hospital and in the rest home. And we're cleaning it out, and that gray elephant meant a lot to me. It's nothing valuable. It's just a homemade built cabinet that's about 8 feet tall. But I helped Dad paint that gray when I was real little. And I always remember Dad talking about it. So I wanted that gray elephant at home. And my wife and I went and got it here a few months ago. And this is what really shocked me. The mice had got in there. Of course, Mom hadn't lived at the farm for about 4 years. The mice had got into that gray elephant and ate everything up in there. Manuals on Dad's Minneapolis Moline tractor, service manuals on the Ford pickups, and all his paperwork he had in there. Paper filters, the mice had ate everything in there except one canvas bag. They had not touched that canvas bag. 3 letters, 4 letters from Hanford Energy Group people, and 5 or 6 Christmas cards, and a whole bunch of actual film footage from World War II were in that bag. Did God tell the mice, stay the hell out of this? You don't know. And but one of the things I want to emphasize the most to you people, I am so deeply grateful for what my wife has done in trying to find my dad's World War II bomber jacket that my mom had donated to the Richland High School, and it's been stolen out of there. It's never shown up again. She ran an ad on social media begging anybody that might have this jacket, we'd pay for it to have it back. The family had it back. Especially to Donald, because Donald is the one that started communicating back, what do you know about this jacket? And if that conversation wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be donating all the stuff to the national park for everybody to enjoy. There's some pieces we give. I've still got a few more pieces that they will be out here sometime, maybe sooner than later. My dad procured a few things out of the plane, and he was ashamed by it later, but the altimeter, the 8-day wind-up clock, and I don't know where it's disappeared. I cannot find his face mask. He had his oxygen mask. His earphones, he had them, and I brought them out. But the altimeter, we took my mother-in-law to the mountains 2 years ago for her 75th birthday, and I wrapped that altimeter in foam so it wouldn't damage it, and we took that to the Colorado Rockies. And if you had the barometric pressure, an altimeter built in 1942 still kept perfect spot-on altitude all through the mountains. That's pretty good testimony. That plane flew 80 or 90 missions, I'm not sure exactly. Dad flew at 24, but for something that delicate, after that many missions of planes being shook up, being shot up, my dad had actually had a piece of the shrapnel that was in one of the fuel cells from the time they had 3 engines out and running on the 4th one. Somebody got into the footlocker and it is no longer there. That would have been a real piece of neat history to have out here, but we don't have that. But you know, all of his life he was so proud of what he accomplished, you know, about working with the plane and stuff. My dad was never one that bragged. He would not, you know, try to gain credit for anything. He was always pretty meek and mild. One time he came to me and he apologized to me for showing off. You know, and I'm in my early 30s, and I said, showing off? He was 65 years old. He'd been battling cancer for 15 years. He'd drive in an activity bus for the track team. And a couple of the athletes were dogging him. You know, hey, old man, don't you wish you could do this? And they started doing some push-ups. And one kid put his feet up on the bottom shelf of the school bus and started doing push-ups. And he kept telling my dad, hey, old man, don't you wish you can do this? And my dad finally said, I'm sorry, son, but I just got tired of them bugging me. And Dad says, well, I think I can. And at 65, battling cancer for 15 years and trying to stay in great health, he got off the bus, did a handstand up against the bus, and did 3 vertical push-ups. The high school kid tried that. Blooded his nose, skinned the side of his face up, and they left Dad alone. But Dad was ashamed of himself for showing off. You know, that's just, you know, what he was. You know, that's how he had to live his life. You know, he always harped on us kids to be all you can be and be better than that. And I just wished I'd have paid more attention. But anyway, but right towards the end, when he was about to pass on, the cancer pretty much had him good. He started trying to find that plane. And my sister went with him a time or two down to the Phoenix scrapyard. And he would spend a week at a time going through that scrapyard, through plane by plane by plane, trying to find pieces of Day's pay. And he died not knowing what happened to it. And I didn't know what happened to it till we got the book, the story on Day's pay, written by a guy over here in Montana, and I can't think of his name right now, but in there it shows Day's pay getting scrapped in 1947 down in that scrapyard in Phoenix. Oh yeah, on my dad's tombstone, Dad was so proud of Day's pay and everything it meant to him that you know, he told my mom that when he passed on, he'd like, if they could do it, he'd like to have Day's pay put on his headstone. And my wife's got a picture of it in her phone of his headstone, and it is so precise. And this was back down in '87. Now they're putting people's faces and pictures on headstones, but back in '87 they etched into his headstone Day's pay. And it's perfectly atomically correct, and you can even read the Day's pay emblem on it. And the mural down here has Dottie over Day's pay, and none of the photos we can find, I don't know what that was, you know, if you've seen that mural down there, you'll see Dottie on there. I don't know what that is, but that's not on any of the pictures we have of the planes. So you get to talking to some of those vets, and they start telling their stories, and it's just amazing. My hat's off to any vets that are in here. How many vets have we got in here? My hat's off to you, gentlemen. You know, because, you know, just about no matter what you did, you gave up stuff. Thank you. Oh.
You're watching CityView TV, your Richland community connection.